Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to talk a little bit about the newest goings the newest goings on in social media, the possible banning or the nationwide banning of the app TikTok. As many people know, at least of what's going on, TikTok is a social media app, a video sharing app that has existed for about 4 or 5 years now, and it is run by an organization called Dance Bite in conjunction with the Chinese government. And since the time it has existed, lawmakers in the United States have been trying to ban it. Donald Trump, when he was the president of the United States, back when it was first coming out, when it was first introduced, uh, he was the one leading the charge of the Ban TikTok movement. Now, the reason the reason he was giving for doing it, and the reason that they're giving now for doing it in 2024 was the was that China is apparently trying to obtain or using the app to obtain data information from Americans. This is the reason why Marco Rubio, who's introducing the bill to Congress, is giving. Now, I'm not saying that's not happening. The Chinese government may very well be behind uh, the TikTok. I mean, be doing that, using TikTok in order to do so. But I believe there is a different reason why they're doing it. I believe the reason is on TikTok, when you go on there, there is an overwhelming amount of support on TikTok for the Palestinians. Most of the most of the TikTok videos that are of a political nature and they talk about this issue are pro-Palestinian. Now, people will try to frame it like the videos are pro-Hamas, like they're in support of Hamas. Now, just like they try to frame every argument as, oh, they're in support. If you're in support of the Palestinians, you're in support of Hamas automatically. But when it comes to all the other social media sites, X, Meta, here on YouTube, and of course, the mainstream media, of all the social media sites, the number one that is pro Palestinian and is really taking up for Palestine's case, the case for Palestinian rights, not just in Gaza, because people talk about Hamas, that's only Gaza, right? The other Palestinian territories, the Golan Heights, that's not run by Gaza. Uh, the West Bank, that's not run by Gaza. So when you have um, videos, both from Americans, Europeans, Arabs, and other people taking up for the Palestinians' case, Israel and the AIPAC lobby, which is the most powerful lobby in the United States, controls both parties. Both parties are going. Both parties are going to support banning said website. They're not out to support any other Chinese website. Weibo could exist in the United States. Other Chinese social media sites could exist within the United States, but TikTok, which is the most prominent Chinese sponsored website or Chinese sponsored social media app, is the one pushing to be banned. Coincidental? Yes, Trump was talking about it in 2019, right? Obviously, because again, we're in a technological Cold War when it comes to the Chinese. We know that. We've talked about it before. But I don't think the reason that they're giving is the real reason. I think the actual real reason is because of this. Because the Chinese stealing data of Americans, okay, why aren't we banned on other websites that the Chinese government could influence? Doesn't make sense. Then they really weren't talking about this before October 7th. Other than Trump, the other politicians in the government, both Democrat and Republican, pardon me, guys, I have to get some water. The other politicians, Democratic as well as Republican, were not talking about banning TikTok in any large way. And a lot of politicians, especially Vivek Ramaswamy now, he kind of confuses me in a way because when it comes to his stance on the issue of TikTok, what did he do? He made it one of his campaign promises to push this legislation through. But at that same time, what did he do? Shortly after he joined TikTok, Nikki Haley, she has made it her mission to ban TikTok, but it was found out that she uses TikTok. Now, TikTok is not the freest of websites either. Of course, it's controlled partially by the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, we know that. So, if you go back to 2019, right? I had a video in 2019 talking about the Hong Kong protest. Now, I don't use TikTok, but if I used TikTok, I wouldn't be able to talk about the Hong Kong protest on TikTok because the Chinese government banned users from discussing the particularities of the Hong Kong protests and sympathizing with the protesters in Hong Kong. But the difference is, again, China is an authoritarian. China, okay, yeah, Lisa saying TikTok been out since 2016. Right. Okay. China is an authoritarian government. They are gonna crack down. Facebook is not allowed in China. Other American websites that are primarily American websites are not allowed in China, social media websites. But we know that about China. You know what I'm saying? We know that they're authoritarian. We know that they're communist, right? But what does it look like for the United States to do something like that? Is the United States going to stoop to their level and actually get involved in banning a social media website that, by the way, with the younger demographic, is more popular than any of the American websites? You know, it's more popular than Instagram. It's more popular than Snapchat. It's more popular than you hear on YouTube. It's more popular than Facebook. More popular than any other website that exists on social media. It is the most popular website with the Gen Z crowd. Now, not a lot of people use it. Most people I know don't use it for political purposes, but when it comes to the political dissemination of ideas, they didn't really start talking about trying to ban it until October 7th, in my opinion. That's what I think, that October 7th and the stance of the majority of TikTokers have on on the October 7th and the aftermath of October 7th has a lot to do with it. It could be that it's something else, but I believe that that's the reason. You know what I mean? Because you didn't hear none of this band talk. I mean, you go on a website, right? You go on any website and you disseminate the case for Palestinian sovereignty and the historical case for Palestine on any website, and you will be banned. You know what I mean? Your account will be removed. You'll be shadow banned. That's just how it is. You know what I mean? So, and what's making the Democrats so on board with this? You know what I mean? What's making them so on board with this? It has to be that. You know what I mean? They weren't the ones beating the drum against China, the anti-China, the xenophobic. Uh, Lisa says in May 2023, Montana became the first state to ban all TikTok on personal devices. Through this, though this is being challenged in court. Okay, well, obviously Montana's a red. Montana's a red state. So 33 states have banned the use of TikTok, at least in the workplace. So using TikTok has become a political stance. And even New York has banned the use of TikTok in the workplace, according to this article. Now, I don't know because I don't know because I don't use TikTok really. In my opinion, to me, being a little bit older, a millennial, and not a Gen Zer, to me, TikTok is a Kesha song. But I think uh, this is wrong. You know what I mean? Targeting young people's political expression. It's no secret that a lot of young people have different opinions, and they're um you know their elders, especially in the Boomer and Gen X generation, vis-a-vis this issue of censorship. And I'm against censorship. I've always been against censorship. I was against Facebook, Twitter banning political ideas. We talked about it even after January the 6th. I'm against that. I feel like in in an ideally free world, people should be allowed to express themselves however they want, no matter what the political opinion is. Because I live by the old saying. I may be against I may be against what you're saying, but I'll defend like hell your right to say it. Because that to me is the American way. That's the democratic way. That is freedom. That's what freedom means. You can't say you defend you can't say that you believe in freedom and that you defend democratic ideals without defending the primary ideal which that is based on. That is freedom of speech. Without freedom of speech, all the other laws and all the other statutes and all the other freedoms, they mean nothing. If you don't have freedom of speech, you have nothing. You know what I mean? The founding fathers understood that. The founding fathers understood that political speech, most of all, people always talk about, like when I was a kid in the 90s, people always talked about freedom of speech to defend obscenities. You know what I mean? To defend cursing on albums or to defend nudity. But political speech is the most important type of speech, and political expression is the most important type of expression that you need to defend. Because in most authoritarian regimes, other than theocracies, other than like Iran or Saudi Arabia, other than these places, they don't really care if you curse on a music CD or if you appear naked, right? That's not a form of dissent in those societies. But they do care if you express yourself politically, if you express an idea that goes against the the grain, against the mainstream of political and social consciousness. That they do care about. And we talked about it before that social media is very powerful. Social media was the thing that inspired the revolution in uh, Egypt in both 2011 and 2015. The the main disseminator of the Arab Spring throughout 2011 is a thing that sparked both the Black Lives Matter movement and the conservative backlash movement within the tennies, right? And it's the thing that has sparked the Me Too movement and other social movements around the world and in the United States as well. It's the genie in the bottle that no government wanted to be let out, because now you can't control what the people say. FCC controls communications here in the United States, which they're behind this TikTok ban as well. Um, they've controlled the print media. They've controlled television media. They didn't at first, but they do now. But the one thing they could not control is the power of the internet. The internet gives everyone a voice. The internet gives every person, it democratizes information and ideas. So this ban of TikTok is one of the worst things that could happen to freedom. So if you have to, write to your local congressman, write to your local senator, write to your local government official, and tell them, do not support this bill that will ban TikTok because it is important that we keep all social communications open. And it is a crucial battle. You know, in 1964. Okay, Lisa's bringing up a point. In 1964, Ronald Reagan was during Barry Goldwater's presidential run, and and Ronald Reagan gave the guest speech at the Republican National Convention that year, and it was one of his more famous uh, speeches. I'm not gonna quote the entire thing, but go look it up. It's called "The Time for Choosing," and in that, he laid out the crucial choices that us as a civilization have to make in order to maintain freedom and democracy in the world at that time. And he was absolutely right then, as the principle stands today. In 2024, we have choices to make. Do we choose tyranny or do we choose freedom and oppression? Lisa said. Lisa says millennials really don't care about TikTok, but Gen Z do because it's a source of income. Millennials say if TikTok gets banned, then Gen Z will have to get an actual job. No, that's not really millennials saying that, Lisa. That's more. I mean, I'm sure some millennials are saying it, but that's more boomers. Boomers are saying that because, yeah, content creators are mad. I see it online. Boomers are saying that because boomers, which are like between 60 or 70 or 75 years old, really old people born during the baby boom after World War II, right? They're saying this because they don't understand the way the new economy works. They believe in the old school way of work of work until you die, physical work. They don't understand content creation. They don't understand how people generate income through content creation. They have no idea, no grasp of this kind of, of this kind of world, right? They have no idea. They think that it's futile. They think that we're just playing around when we create content, right? They think that it's just stupid shit, right? This is what I mean, not millennials, people older than millennials, basically Gen Xers and baby boomers, right? They think that because they don't understand it. But I beckon the baby boomers. I, like I said, Lisa, some millennials are saying it, but I hear it more from Gen Zers and Gen Xers and baby boomers. But I beckon the baby boomers to think back to the things that the silent generation and the greatest generation, quote unquote, the people that came before them, like those during World War One or during the Depression or during the Prohibition, people that came before them were saying about them. It was these same baby boomers that were burning their draft cards. It was these same baby boomers that were burning their bras. It was these same baby boomers that were refusing to go again, like I said, to Vietnam. It was these same baby boomers that were marching with Martin Luther King in Selma, right? These same baby boomers that were at the time bucking the system in the previous system of their generation, going against sexism, pushing for the pill, pushing for Roe v. Wade in 73. Now they're telling them, now they're the ones seeming out of touch by telling the younger generation that we need to just shut up and get a job, and kind of content creation doesn't mean shit. But we're the ones doing the work. We might not be out there marching. We might not be out there burning draft cards. We might not be out there doing that sort of stuff. But we are pushing the political envelope in our own way, right? The millennials and Gen Zers, by changing the narrative, by taking information into our own hands. And they can't put the genie back into the bottle, so to speak, be, with this, because social media is already what social media has become. The online economy is what the online economy is. People are leaving the matrix, as Andrew Tate said. I mean, just look at Andrew Tate himself. This is a person who his entire career is built off social media. His entire career, his entire persona is telling the uncomfortable truths about society as he sees it. And the millennials, some of the millennials that are going against this, honestly, Lisa, are just snowflakes, right? They are snowflake millennials. The one thing about Gen Zers, they are tougher. Gen Zers were born after the dot-com bust, after 9/11, after the economic crash of 2008, and after COVID. They've experienced this all. Millennials, a lot of us, were softies because we we are softies because the time we grown up, okay, I'm not you. I'm talking about the generation of millennials as a whole. Gen Zers have seen nothing but drama throughout their entire existence. Lisa, throughout the entire existence of the millennial generation, there has been war in the United States. The United States has been out. Say, if you were born in 2001, right, or you were born in 2005, let's say, right, like Victoria, or 2007, around 2007 ish or 5 ish, or anytime during the 2000s, right? If you were born in that area, in that range, during your lifetime, you okay. We went through 9/11. They didn't go through 9/11 because they weren't born yet or they were just babies. But my point is, uh, they have experienced the greatest series of events, back to back, concurrent crisis after concurrent crisis. Lady, you were born in 2007, right? You were born in 2007, right after 9/11, a couple of years after 9/11, a few years after, 6 years after. The dot-com bust already happened. The war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, Then right after the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq, right into the war in Ukraine, right into the Israel, right into October 7th. What comparable during, and this is during their childhood. They're not even adults yet, most of them. What comparable in our existence during our time as millennials did we have? Most of us were in our late teens when 9/11 happened. The 90s that we millennials love to pine about and talk about and can't seem to stop talking about and can't seem to forget about and let go away, we consider that as the apex of civilization. But that was an anomaly in American history. That was an unusual time in world and American history because there was no global conflict. Yes, there was two genocides in 1995 and 1994 respectively. Okay, Lisa's saying, oh, the kids don't really care about which wars? 2022, Ukraine, the TikTok October 7th, Gaza. To me, I don't know. That's what I've been seeing for the past 2 years on social media, even on TikTok, Lisa. So I don't know where you're getting it that kids don't care about these wars because they absolutely kids kids in the Gen Z generation, kids in the Gen Z generation, at least, they are more politically in tune than us. Kids in our generation, we were not politically in skewed. I remember 9/11 is a perfect example. Lisa's correct when she brings up, oh, not the recent wars. Every kid doesn't have a blue and yellow flag on their Facebook or other kind of social media for standing with Ukraine or something to say in regards to Gaza. A war that no war happened in 2007. You're right, Lisa. But we were already their entire lives. We've been in war. I mean, we were in Afghanistan for 21 years. Lisa, 21 years. Half of these Gen Z kids aren't even 21 yet. And they experienced the economic crash, the greatest economic crash in the history of the United States in 2008. Now, that's older Gen Zers because younger Gen Zers were like babies, in 2008. But still, has the world really recovered from the economic crash of 2008? You know, no. But compare that to us. Lisa says, and Gen Z doesn't care about the uh, about Afghanistan, where they care about. So, oh, Okay, Lisa's bringing up a fair point. I agree with Lisa in a sense. Kids don't experience a crap, but their parents do though. Their parents do, and they see the anguish on their parents' faces. They see that mom can't pay the bills. Dad has to. He's late on his car note. His car is being repossessed, or his house is being repossessed, or he doesn't have enough money for food, right? Or mom doesn't have enough money for food. They see that, and that's the things they experience, and that's the things that they remember. Their generation, I believe, is going to be similar in the way they react to the world as the World War II Depression generation was. The World War II and Depression generation, they was very tight with their money and they were very conservative in their viewpoints. You know what I mean? Because they experienced World War II and Depression, even in the Great Depression. Even though they were babies, still you might not experience it on a micro on a macro level, like a big level, but you experience it just through your family going through economic hardship. We can't say that we experienced that because by the time we came of age, I mean, your socioeconomic status, of course, plays a role, whether or not your family had money or whether or not you didn't. But the economy was so good back in the day, in the 1990s, even those that were on the bottom of the socioeconomic level still experienced some of the boom that came from the birth of the internet in the late 1990s. And that, yeah, we experienced it too. That's why I'm saying. So you're saying it's millennials mainly saying this about the Gen Zers. I don't think it's more. I think it's more so the older generation. But I just think the millennials are a little bit more. Hmm, yeah, we experienced the work. There was nothing left for us. You know, coming out of college, there was nothing left for us. We were coming out of college 2004, 2005 ish. Many of us wanting to start families. We didn't have the chance, we didn't have the opportunity to start families. But those of us, like myself, that did have children, right? And the children, no, I'm saying millennials as kids didn't experience any hardships, really any hardships, basically in the world. Millennials as kids, Lisa, not as adults, as children. Okay, I'm talking, you're saying about when we entered into the job market. Okay, yeah, that's one thing. We entered into the job market, we were experiencing the dot com bust, right? We were experiencing the war in Afghanistan, and then later the war in Iraq, and then later the housing bubble burst in 2008, the Great Recession. We were experiencing it as adults. What Gen Z, right? I brought that up, the dot com bust. Yeah, but Gen Z is experiencing it as children. They're experiencing it as kids, right? And also, what they're experiencing is not a baby boom like after World War II, but a baby bust. They are the first generation that a lot of them don't have siblings, right? A lot of their parents are not married. We were coming, okay, Lisa's saying that nobody was coming out of college in I'm talking about, okay, I'm talking about, let me specify timelines so Lisa and other people can understand. I'm talking about 2008 9. Okay, Lisa, 2007 to 10 when we were coming out of college. When we were coming out of college, no cap, our generation 38, 35, 37, 39, like 35 to 40. there was zero jobs, right? We were still recovering. We didn't even fully recover from the Great Recession until 2019, really. TikTok was already existing back then, right? And then right after that, we got into COVID. So I'm talking about the latter half of the 2000s when, okay, yes, but it got worse. It got worse, Lisa. Lisa saying in 9/11, it got worse. It got a little bit better in 2004 or 5. But by the time many of us that had children started to have children, I'm talking about '07, '08, '09, 10, 11, right? This was the worst time in American history other than the 1930s. You know what I mean? I mean, the absolute worst time in American history. Right, but what did, okay, but they saw all the pain from their parents' generation, from our generation. They saw the things we went through, and that made them tougher. When we were kids, when we were their age, we didn't have to worry about such things. That's what I'm saying. When we were 16, when we were 17, before 9/11, I'm talking about before 9/11, okay, Lisa? Let me specify. Before 9/11, in the 90s, why do you think millennials always act like the 90s was the best era to ever exist, right? But why do you think that is? Because it was an economically prosperous time, especially the late 90s. Okay, the late 90s, 1998, 1999, 1997, 1996, right? By the time the internet came around in the mid, like 1995, the internet came around, like really started to boom. The dot com boom. It was a great economic time, and it was a time after the Soviet Union. Right, Lisa is so. I'm speaking facts, Lisa. Lisa saying right here. Lisa, I tried to get a job in '08, '09. So there you go, right there, Lisa. What I'm talking about. Now imagine Lisa had a child in '07, '08, '09. When her child was young, like was the case with me, seeing that their parent couldn't get a job, couldn't provide for them really like that on a substantial basis. How would that shape the child's view of the American government? How would that shape the child's view of the world in comparison to us when we was little like that? And things were starting to go good. Things It was an economic boom, right? We had an optimistic view of the world before 9/11. They have a negative view of the world. They just do because one thing after another, whether they experienced themselves or saw it through the eyes of their parents, one thing after another has confirmed in their minds that they cannot trust the government, that they cannot trust the people in power, that they cannot trust the politicians. One thing after another that they've experienced, that they've seen, um, right. But when we was kids in the 90s, our parents didn't struggle really that much. I mean, yes, like I said, depending on your socioeconomic status. Yes, people's families, the people that always had struggle, of course. And to a limited degree, our families had struggles too. But even when you're on the bottom of the economic ladder, when there's an abundance of wealth and when there's abundance of opportunities, like there was in the late 90s because of the internet. right? And all the new job opportunities that were popping up. And because the world was pretty much a stable place, even those on the bottom get a little bit of the crumbs because there's so much to go around. There's so much of the pie to go around. And that's why millennials view the 90s as the apex of civilization. Because as far as it pertains to the United States, there was really no problems. You know what I mean? Our problems were internal. Our problems were, a lot of racism and stuff that these generation is seeing with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement or Charlottesville. It didn't really exist. I mean, it existed, yes, in certain pockets, especially in the early '90s, but and with the OJ trial and stuff. But it lay dormant for a while. Like we were really sold the idea when we were kids that racism was over, right? Racism, we looked at it like a thing of the past, right? Like a thing experienced in history, even though some of us known that it always existed and never really went away, but it seemed like it was gonna start to go away, only to have it turn worse or just as bad as it was in the 60s and 70s, in later decades, later generations. So that's what I'm saying. These kids are tougher because they're at the center of a lot of big events in world and global history, whereas we really weren't. You know what I mean? After the Berlin Wall came down and after the Rodney King riots, you didn't really hear about a lot of major conflicts in the world. You know what I mean? From like 1993 to like 1999, 2000. You know what I mean? You did if you were paying attention. If you were as a kid, like paying attention to other parts of the world, like Rwanda, like Ethiopia, like Bosnia, like Kosovo, yeah, then you saw things like that in the 90s. But even then, that didn't really hit as home because the United States didn't really get involved closely with things like that, like they were in the Middle East, let's say, or in uh, Ukraine, like they are now, right? Even the Middle East in 1993, people were optimistic because, yeah, Lisa's bringing up an excellent point too that I didn't even think about. Says our parents hid their struggles from us. The millennials can't hide their struggles because there's the internet and kids got access to, yeah, they have access to a lot of different news. And that's true with the government as well. They can, our worldview was shaped by what our parents implemented. Now, obviously, if you have parents that they grew up in the South back in the 60s and 50s and 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they were people of color, obviously, you know that racism was never going away. If you had parents that were on the lower of the economic ladder, of course, they always have financial struggles. So that's nothing new. But I'm saying, as far as the entirety of society, certain things were kept from us, and now they can no longer be kept from the kids today. The genie is out the bottle. Like I said, even in the Middle East, when it came to the Middle Eastern conflict, people thought, people were optimistic that something good was going to happen in 1993 when Palestine and Israel signed the Oslo Accords, right? But by the late 90s, the death of Yitzhak Rabin, and by the late 90s, and by the 2000s and 2010s especially, That's no longer true, and especially not true today, in today's world after October 7th. And because of that, because of the internet, and because of people's access to information, people are becoming wiser even about this conflict. You know, what I mean? People are not so quick to take the side of Israel over the Palestinians, and they're seeing more the Palestinians' case. The things that the Palestinians. Well, thank you, Jason. The things that the Palestinians are saying, not that they're taking the side of Hamas, they're looking at it from a thorough perspective, right? They're looking at it from a macro perspective. They're looking at both sides. People are astonished, some people, some Americans, some Westerners, are astonished to learn that the land before 1948 was called the British Mandate of Palestine. People didn't actually know that. You know what I mean? People, I have people in my own family that assume that the land was always called Israel, that it was called Israel since biblical times, right? It was called Israel when Jesus was alive. It was called Israel, during the Roman period, the Byzantine period. They completely forget about the Islamic period because they know nothing of it. That's the failure of the school system, but that also is propaganda. Just like the Chinese side has their version of propaganda, their version of things that they don't want you to know, the American government and other Western governments have the exact same thing. But we have to be above that, right? We're supposed to be the exemplar. The West is for democracy, for freedom of speech. So we can't stoop to their level and ban stuff. They're using the data thing as an excuse. But how do we know that the United States and the government of the UK or the government of France or the government of any other Western country isn't guilty of collecting data on its citizens as well? To me, I just think that it has less to do with the economic competition or the technological Cold War of that exists between China and the United States, and more to do with Gen Z's opinion on Israel and Gen Z's opinion about the United States government and its involvement in this conflict. People are really turning against, not necessarily young people, are really turning against not necessarily Jewish people, not necessarily Israel in and of itself, but this idea of Zionism. People have a distaste in their mouth for racial supremacy. They don't want to see it, racial and ethnic supremacy. They don't want to see it resurface in the world, right? And they see Zionism as a form of racial and ethnic supremacy. Right. Jason is saying the last few years I've seen the erosion or the loss, as he phrases it, of Western moral authority. Yes, absolutely, absolutely, because their support of these other regimes, things that they've always kind of done, things that all governments do, because that's what politics essentially is. Anybody that has ever watched Game of Thrones knows this to be true. Politics, each side will do whatever it takes. Each side has a Machiavellian viewpoint of politics. The end justifies the mean, but it's different when you're dealing with an autocratic regime like China versus, like, they'll do what they do and they'll tell you that they do what they do. I mean, they ban all criticism. They ban all criticism of Xi Jinping. If you post on Chinese social media like they were a couple of years ago, memes of Xi Jinping as Winnie the Pooh, you'll be in trouble. when it comes to China. But the West takes the approach we're free, and then they end up not being free. So they end up looking hypocritical. Whereas countries like China, countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Iran, like for example, the West takes the approach. I'll, uh, I'll see what Jason has to say. He says exactly. The West takes the approach. I'll see what Jason has to say about this. That they're against Islamic fundamentalism. They're against the atrocities of Islamic fundamentalism, against countries like Iran, right? And they use Iran as an example, or Hamas, or Gaza, which is controlled by Hamas since 2006. But yet, their biggest ally in the region is Saudi Arabia. Isn't Saudi Arabia isn't Saudi Arabia guilty of the same things as Iran, other than being Sunni, Saudi Arabia, and another being Shia, Iran? They're guilty of the same things. The only thing, Saudi Arabia is a Western ally, and Iran is not a Western ally. So if you want to take the stand against Islamic fundamentalism, then you have to take a stand against both regimes. And not only that, they take a moral stance against communism, right? But yet, the United States does a lot of its business in China, is economically engaged with China, and has been since the opening of China in the 1970s during the Nixon administration. So either you're against something or you're not against it. You're against the ideology of it or you're not against it. Well, Lisa says not just the Israel conflict, but the United States wants to control everything we know and don't know. But Lisa, all governments do that. You know what I mean? But some just are more honest about it. You know what I mean? All governments do that. They have to do it because if not, if people really know what really goes on behind the scenes, then governments would be in trouble. They wouldn't be able to manipulate the way that they do. So my stance is that they're not really against China or they're not really against Iran necessarily. I mean, they claim to be against these regimes, but only in relation to countries that are complete allies of the United States in certain regions of the world, like Taiwan to China, or Japan to China, or Iran to, of course, Israel. But I think Israel's the biggest one because they control so much. They have so many politicians in their back pocket, and they control the narrative so egregiously, Lisa, so severely, like to the point where you cannot criticize anything that their government does. And their government is seen to be beyond reproach. They're a sacred cow beyond all sacred cows. People talk about feminists being a sacred cow, and in many instances, they are. You know what I mean? We've talked about it before, how they try to uh, uh, make men, masculine men into feminine men with the dissemination of ultra feminism, right? But the sacred cow beyond all, through movies and stuff, replacing male leads like in Star Wars or in Terminator and other um, popular forms of fiction, that are geared towards men with women, right? And they're right about feminists, but and they're right about the wokest, but the wokest of the woke, the secretest cow of the secretest cow, the one that even the Republicans won't touch, that even the Republicans become snowflakes about, is the Israel conflict. That's the number one. That's the number one sacred cow of all sacred cows that no party will touch. That nobody with a 10-foot pole would try to touch. But political TikTokers are touching on this. Political TikTokers are speaking about it. Political TikTokers are exposing it. Even Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate, when he was on Tucker Carlson, I mean, not Tucker Carlson. I think he was, yeah, it was on Tucker. Tristan was on Tucker Carlson. Andrew, I think, was on Candace Owens. Or Pierce Morgan. Pierce Morgan said to him, would you denounce Hamas? Like, to me, asking somebody, do you denounce Hamas? That's the stupidest thing ever that anybody could ever ask. Of course, we denounce what Hamas did on October the 7th, but it didn't happen out of a vacuum. It didn't happen for no reason at all. 9/11 didn't happen for no reason at all. There was backgrounds and repercussions to why it happened. You know what I mean? There's a reason why they did what they did. You might not agree with the methods of why they did what they did, right? But there's a reason for it. Maybe because they didn't have a voice. You know, the, right? Lisa is saying she, right, the stuff in Haiti. We are told, they want us, Lisa's right, I'm telling you, the stuff in Haiti, happening in Haiti, no one's talking about it. It's being talked about on TikTok, and the U.S. is ignoring it by not bringing it up. We, they want us, the powers that be in this society, in the West, they want us to be, the U.S. The U.S., but the West more broadly, they want us to be, look at the world like we look at us as wrestling fans looked at the world when we believed wrestling was real, when we believed in kayfabe. They want us to look at bad guys versus good guys, and the bad guys are always the bad guys, no matter what, and they just do things because they're bad, right? They're evil, bad baddies, and they're, they're autocrats, and they just do things just to do them. When we know that's not human nature, that reality doesn't exist that way. You know what I mean? There's no such thing as a super baddie, in the old school sense, not the baddie, like a girl that's hot, but in the old school sense, like a villain, right? There's no such thing as that. You know what I mean? People are motivated, people have different motivations. Everybody is a human being, everybody is trying to survive in this world. And there are reasons to why people support politically extremist ideas. Television is tightly controlled. Television has been tightly controlled. And the older generations think, oh, I saw it on the TV, so it must be true. Them Hamas, them the Hamas terrorists, they're evil and bad. Whereas the younger generations, they're looking at it from a more nuanced point of view. Even Tucker Carlson found this out. Tucker Carlson uh, has become more popular since he's moved to X than he even was on television. He's become more nuanced since he's moved to the internet. On the internet, they cannot control the narrative, but on TV, they can. On radio, they can. The rise of the internet is the biggest information revolution that we've experienced since the 16th century and the invention of the printing press. When the printing press was invented in the 16th century, what the information that was kept from the people, because people, especially the religious information at that time, the Bible was paramount in Western society. It was kept from the people because they didn't speak Latin. They spoke the vernacular languages, so they weren't able to read actually what the Bible said. When the printing press came out and the Bible was printed in the vernacular language, and people were allowed to finally in German and in English later on, and in all the vernacular languages of Western Europe, they were allowed to speak and to see exactly what the Bible was saying in its own words, in the way that it was written. It sparked a revolution, sparked the Protestant Reformation, which eventually led to the Enlightenment, which eventually led to both the American and French revolutions. They couldn't control the narrative anymore. The cat was let out of the bag, and the internet was similar. Right, right, exactly, Jason. The rise of Protestantism. When Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses on the door, that was it. The Catholic Church had lost control. And the Catholic Church, which was the ruling power, they weren't the direct ruling elite because Western Europe never really had a theocracy per se, like the Islamic caliphates, but they ruled indirectly. They influenced the leaders of certain countries. They even had to change the way they did business, so they had to counter Reformation. The Catholic Church that we see today in the world is not the Catholic Church prior to Martin Luther. It's a different Catholic Church. Not only are they no longer selling indulgences, and they're no longer engaging in the corrupt practices they once were, they're still engaging in corrupt practices, and they're being exposed daily. Not to say that they aren't. But still, the cat was let out of the bag in the world. The world experienced a revolution. Television was a similar revolution. We didn't understand the people didn't understand really the details, the gory details, if you will, of war, or how bad racism and the Jim Crow South really was if they lived in other parts of the country before they saw it on TV, before they saw people getting hosed down in the streets and the cruelties on the nightly news day in and day out in the Vietnam War. But once they saw that, they couldn't control the narrative anymore. And likewise, the internet is the same thing. Once that beast of freedom is unleashed, it spreads like wildfire. It did in the Americas after the American Revolution. Other countries in the Americas that surrounded the United States, Venezuela, Chile, Argentina. For a minute there, everybody wanted to be democratic because that fever had spread. The mood of the society had changed. And I think for the longest now, since the internet has existed, the West has been trying to gain a foothold and gain hold of it and try to manipulate it somehow and try to control it somehow. It's like the dragon of the Middle Ages. But they haven't been able to. They've tried the SOPA Act for years, They got completely got a hold of here on YouTube. Here on YouTube, the early days of YouTube used to be the Wild Wild West. You could say anything, you could do anything. Political expression was at its zenith here on YouTube back in the day. I didn't make videos back then, but I wish I had. Always telling Lisa that I wish I had been a content creator in '06, '07. You know, from the mid 2000s to the early 2010s before everything changed, but especially before after it was purchased by Google. Uh, it was freer then. So they're trying to get a hold of it with TikTok, but they can't with TikTok because it's controlled by a different government. So what they're gonna try to make you do is try to make you as a consumer turn against TikTok by saying, "Well, look, it's from the Chinese, right? It's evil, right? It's destroying society. It's promoting degeneracy. But isn't the West, isn't Hollywood, aren't the elites in Washington, aren't they promoting the degeneracy? Aren't they promoting uh, this smut, this rise of the effeminate man? They're the ones promoting the degeneracy, not not the Chinese government. You don't see a lot of degeneracy coming out of China. You see a lot of degeneracy coming out of the ruling elites here in the West. That's where I see the degeneracy coming from. Not the, I don't see a lot of degeneracy on the Chinese side. They pretty much have control of their society. They pretty much have a uniformity about their society. They learned their lesson during the Opium Wars that when they let a degenerate element into their society, it could overrun their society, which is actually what it did, which led to the downfall of the Ming Dynasty, the last classical dynasty in Chinese history. They saw what can happen when you let degeneracy in. When you let degeneracy in, it can run amok in the world. It can, and it's happening here. It's happening here in the West. West is slowly being eroded, piece by piece, and we're letting the elites lead us as lambs to the slaughter. How soon before we're at the crossroads? You know, we're at the Rubicon. We're like Caesar at the Rubicon. How soon before we allow ourselves to be crossed over like the Rubicon River in Italy to the point of no return? Is the die already cast for the West? Or are we going to turn back the clock and make the right moral decision? Peace, guys. Don't forget to, right, Jason. Fascinating, yeah. A time for choosing from the West. Where do we go from here? Those that keep in mind Benjamin Franklin's quote: "Those that will trade freedom for security deserve neither." So, are we willing to trade our freedom for security? Are we willing to give up TikTok for to feel safe, as it were, or because this could be another this TikTok thing about stealing our data, quote unquote. This could be another red scare. This could be a way. This could be a manipulation tactic by those in power to gain more power. you know, this is why we study history. Lisa and other people, I often get asked this as a history tutor. Why do we have to know this? Right? Not just singling out Lisa, but in general, people that people that ask, why do we have to know about these other instances? Because, as it were, human nature is what human nature is and always gonna be. That we repeat the same things over and over. We see this in the Bible, right? Each generation in the Bible makes exactly the same mistakes as the previous generation. You would think they would learn from their mistakes, but they constantly keep messing up and they constantly keep fumbling the ball. So those that don't study history are doomed to repeat it, and we're probably doomed to repeat it in general anyway. But at least I feel like students of history, students of serious history, history teachers, history uh, students of history, not necessarily history teachers, because they're employed by the school system, which is a branch, which is a branch of the United States government. But anyway, they students of history will know that they're like kind of like weathermen. Weathermen don't exactly. This is a point that Bob Dylan made in his songs back in the day. Weathermen don't exactly know what's going to happen with the weather because the weather is unpredictable. They can use the past and what has happened as a general indicator of what could happen. So we look at examples like the Red Scare, McCarthyism, right in the 50s. We look at examples like, uh, uh, for example, the bubonic plague, and like I said, the right and how governments have used crisis events, to gain power. I mean, hell, you don't even have. Lisa says, cybersecurity expert who testified before the House committee to recommend that TikTok either be sold. And Jason says, wheat from the chaff, moral crossroads are good for humanity and advancing souls. Exactly, because it forces us to choose between the moral good and the moral. Are we going to take the moral high ground, or are we going to take uh, the moral low ground? What are we going to what are we going to choose in the end of the day? But I say keep TikTok, keep keep all freedom. Okay, Lisa asked a question. Lisa, what's your question? Lisa, what's your question, Lisa? Can they can they ban it? I don't think they can. I mean, but sold to who though? You know what I mean? Like, are are they asking that it be sold to an American company? Okay, yeah. Lisa, I didn't see that one, Lisa. Lisa asks, wouldn't that mean that technically the U.S. is like a quasi communist state if they're using state power to overrun a private entity? Yes, it would, Lisa. More like a fascist government. Because think about it, Lisa, a communist government is when the government, a communist economy is when the government completely takes over an industry and the government becomes that industry. But a fascist government like Hitler or like Mussolini, right, they allow for private industry to exist as long as the private industry goes along with the government agenda. So they give the illusion of freedom, the illusion of choice, the illusion of capitalism. Because fascism, Lisa, was a third, was considered to be a third wave, a third option, the third way when it was first devised in Italy. It was a third way considered to be between communism and capitalism. There was communism and Marxism on the one hand that was overrunning Europe. The Russian Revolution had already taken place. And then there was the capitalism of the UK and the United States at that time. But the Germans and the Italians, they didn't. They wanted to take a third option, not completely overrunning all industry and putting the means of production in the hands of the common people, of the common workers, as it were, like Marxism was advocating, but also uh, 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 not a complete free enterprise either. So they wanted the governments and the big uh, yeah, Lisa, I'm answering your question now. Um, it would be more it would be more like a fascist government where the government and big government and big business work in concert with each other, whereas in a communist government, the government and the business become one and the same. In a fascist regime, they have a more of a symbiotic relationship where they work in concert together, and that initially works for an economic boom. People forget how booming uh, the economies of Germany especially, um, were during the Nazi regime. But the freedoms of the people were severely hit. So while they were booming economically, the freedoms of the people were took a severe hit. So I wouldn't say that they're advocating communism. What they're advocating is fascism, the overrunning of an industry, big government in concert with big business. They're really against TikTok not only because of it's so popular, or like Jason is saying, a strongman maneuver, but also because it's more popular than the American social media companies. Way more popular than the American social media companies. And the American social media companies, big tech as it were, don't like that. Of course they don't. You know what I mean? So they want to use the government to strong arm their competition. You know, people always complain about monopolization and people always complain about unfair business practices when it's not in their favor. We see that as we are fans of wrestling. We see that. You know what I mean? Uh, the territories that Vince McMahon took over in the 1980s cried foul. They cried about monopolization, but meanwhile, for about 40 years before that, they themselves were engaging in monopolization in in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. You know, the NWA was basically a monopolization of an entire industry. for decades. And then Vince came along and he did the exact same thing and they cried foul. So just like with these big tech companies, they're crying foul now because of how popular TikTok is, but they themselves would have did the exact same thing. But the government of the US would have been able to manipulate them in ways that they can't manipulate with TikTok. Uh, if they banned it, yeah, it would be a communistic tactically, so it would be like communism, but I think it would be more like fascism. The answer is kind of yes, kind of no. But there again, they're stooping to China's level. China is not for a long time now, since the death of Chairman Mao. China has not been a truly communist state for the longest now. They have certain private enterprise. I mean, the fact that TikTok can exist is, well, yeah, Jason, we are wrestling. He says wrestling is analogous to so much. Well, we're primarily a wrestling channel here, but we use the prism of wrestling or the history of wrestling in certain instances and certain examples in wrestling to explain the broader context of society. And we also use Star Wars in that sense too, as well. And as we know, um, Star Wars is very political. As we know, Palpatine in the story uses uses the crisis, the scare, if you will, of rebellion of the Jedi and the breakdown of society and chaos that he himself creates and engineers to seize power. That's the whole story of the prequels. How he uses manipulation, how he uses fear, how he convinces the people of the Galactic Republic that the Jedi are the true enemy, that the people that are trying to do good are the true enemy. And you could say that the United States government and the Western powers are doing the exact same thing. They're calling a boogeyman. They're using the boogeyman of communism, which Lisa's bringing up, that they themselves are kind of acting communistic or acting fascistic, if you will. You know, by banning TikTok, they're using the boogeyman of China to scare the people, sort of like Palpatine using the boogeyman of the Jedi to scare the people. Jason says Star Wars is masterful, even it manages to touch spirituality. Exactly. But one thing it also touches, though, Jason, is dogmatism, how we get bogged down in dogmatism. And the reason the Jedi were like deer caught in the headlights, so to speak, uh, was because and they couldn't see the forest from the trees is because they were so bogged down in dogmatism. They were so bogged down in ideology. And I think that has happened here in the United States. We're so concerned with party affiliation. We're so concerned with making the other side out to be the bad guy that we can't even see the boogeyman in our own courtyard. You know what I mean? We can't even see the coyote in our own fields, as it were. They couldn't see Palpatine because they were so busy, you know. Now, we're not just a wrestling channel, Lisa. We are a historical analytical channel. But again, we we use we use wrestling as a prism. We use pop culture as a prism to understand and to analyze the goings on in the world. We may use movies, we may use music, we may use social media, we may use religion, we may use spirituality, but we use these examples to understand the world around us, to bring knowledge, as it were, to an ordinary populace. But wrestling is a perfect example because life is predicated on conflict. And because wrestling is stage combat and manipulated conflict, and it attacks our base emotions, right? Our base prejudices, our base instincts, right? And because in the real world, outside of kayfabe, wrestling promoters have used manipulations as forms of crowd control. Like if you see the way the heels and baby faces control crowds through the way they act, right, and are able to rip the people up in a frenzy. And promoters have engineered these reactions. They tell you to like uh, Roman Reigns, or they tell you to like Cody Rhodes, or they tell you to like John Cena, or they tell you to dislike this wrestler and that wrestler. And because wrestling, as in a sense, is on the fringes of respectability in the world because it's quote unquote fake, right? And people know that it's fake and manipulated. Uh, the internet was Wrestling was one of the first mediums to be touched by the uprising of the internet. One of the first core audiences to use the internet to influence booking and the way the show was written. The IWC was one of the first internet phenomenons way back in the 90s. When people weren't talking about the influence of the internet on the broader spectrums of society, the IWC existed, and the IWC was vocal. The internet wrestling community was vocal back in the 90s when other forms of other facets of society weren't taken to the internet yet. Movie fans hadn't been as vociferous, other than Star Wars fans. Star Wars fans were like the second most. You know what I mean? They were the second most to use the internet to influence the trajectory of not necessarily the way that things went, because Lucas did what Lucas wanted to do anyway. They never really influenced it, but they were the first to make their opinions known, like in 1999, that they didn't like Phantom Menace. So in these fandom communities, they understood the power of the internet and they understood the power of their voice before the broader spectrums of society, the broader facets of society understood it. People weren't using the internet to influence the political opinions just yet. People weren't using the internet to influence social opinions just yet. Yes, that's that. See the yeah. At least Jason's bring up a great point. 1995, Bret the Hitman Hart appeared on a WWF magazine, and on this WWF magazine, uh, uh, everybody that bought this particular copy of the WWF magazine, this particular issue, received a free LOL CD. So before anybody else, even before Star Wars fans, understood the power of the internet and the power of the voice of the people, wrestling understood it. You know, wrestling understood the wrestling. They thought they could control it. They thought they could manipulate it. But just like with the broader spectrum, the broader swaths of society, it got beyond them, right? It it expanded beyond them, and later on they weren't able to influence it as much, and the fandom changed. The fandom knew they had a voice, and you could to an incident like WrestleMania 30, where the company wanted you to have Batista in the main event. The people took to Twitter, they took to Facebook, they took to social media, and they influenced the way things were going, with their voices. And now the greater society has realized the power of their voice in the internet in ways that they haven't before. But wrestling was one of the first phenomenons to be touched by this. Music was another phenomenon to be touched by this. I remember when the music industry was so pissed off. Eminem and Metallica and Dr. Dre sued Napster because millionaires and billionaires that uh, millionaires who became billionaires were upset because people were downloading their music, and not buying it from stores. People were bootlegging their music until they finally realized, hey, we had to change the way we do business, or else we're not going to have a music business anymore. And then streamings became more important than album sales. Movies experienced this, not just Star Wars, but who remembers in 2010, After Earth, the Will Smith movie. Will Smith had planned this entire franchise surrounding his son, Jaden, where he had action figures planned out. He planned to make this sci-fi series the next Star Wars or the next Star Trek. And as soon as the first movie came out, it sucked, and people took to social media and they made their voices heard. And nobody went to see this movie, and it flopped because the people spoke. The people finally had a voice. Politics, because political discourse is so dominated by the older demographics that don't know about technology or don't pay attention to technology, like in their 50s and 60s. Like we said, they're the last. This is the last facet of society to be right. Lisa saying, since the internet came into play, it changed the game for how all genres of all genres of entertainment. Yeah, it definitely has, Lisa. But now politics, politics is always considered a pastime of the elderly. You know what I mean? Young people don't really go out to vote that much. You know what I mean? They don't feel like they have a stake in it. They really should more, because the old people are going to die anyway. What difference does it make what they think? But because even ever since Roman times, the Senate has always been composed of elders. Older people pay attention to it more, and they don't really know about technology. So they're like, oh, them young people on their Twitter or their Facebook, you know, their opinions don't really matter, on their TikTok or whatever. But now young people are becoming engaged. Now politics is catching up to where entertainment was. Politics is catching up, and politics is starting to feel the heat and feel the pressure in ways that they hadn't before. You could say that uh, the Obama's rise to popularity and prominence in the latter half of the 2000s, the 2000s going into the 2010s was a product of the internet. Trump's rise certainly was a product of the internet, the internet phenomenon. The Republican status quo did not support him at first. They did everything they could to block him and to stop him, but he had the support. He had the popular support of the people. At least the common folk, everyday common folk in the Republican Party, and that propelled him. You know, I first started to see the effects of it in the late 2000s with both Obama and Ron Paul. That's when I really started to come online. I was already online in the late 90s, but I was a kid back then paying more attention to like music and other facets of entertainment, professional wrestling. I was political, but I wasn't really political as far as going on message boards. But I started to see it both on the left with Ron Paul and on the left with Obama and the right with Ron Paul. Ron Paul was not a guy that the mainstream right wanted us to support. They were we were all on the Bush train. We were on the McCain train. McCain was so unpopular with the people on the right, but Ron Paul was saying something different. Ron Paul was going against the mainstream narrative about U.S. intervention, especially in the Middle East, and it was attracting a lot of younger people. Here's this 70-year-old guy, right, from Texas, one of the most conservative states in the union, and he was attracting so many young people and so many libertarians just based on the basis of the things he was saying that was so different than things that the other mainstream politicians at the time were saying, and especially on the political right. And then 2012 it got even bigger, in 2016 even bigger. In 2000, by 2020, the election in 2020, it was completely determined by the internet. The internet was a complete factor in it. It's only gotten larger. So they really want to try to get a hold on this and really try to get control of it, you know, before it becomes too big. That's what I think. And hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully people speak up. Hopefully this is a win for those that believe in freedom, both in the political right and the political left. Because when it comes to this, uh, the woke left might think that they're gaining a victory, or the moralistic right might think they're gaining a victory. Oh, because there are certain things on TikTok, certain TikTokers, might go against the orthodoxies, because each side has orthodoxies. Each side has sacred cows that they don't want to violate. The right has Israel, the left has Israel to an extent, but the left has more sacred cows, I think, than the right. They have BLM, they have feminism, they have trans rights, and they might think that uh, they're gaining a victory by, oh, we got one over on the right, but they better realize and better wake up that just as they came for them, they'll come for you. You know, first they came for the communist, and I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. You know, then they came for the socialist, and I said nothing because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came, then they came for the Jews, and I said nothing because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for me. So that same beast that you used to destroy another political opposition could be used to destroy you as well. You know what I mean? So that's why I support freedom across the board. I remember Lisa and I, after January the 6th, Lisa and I got into this heated debate. Heated. And you can go back and look at the January 6th video. We got into this heated debate where I said, even at that time, I said, I do not support the banning of anybody of any political persuasion on any social media website, despite anything they say. Because just as quickly as they ban those people for their political opinions, they'll ban me for my political opinions as well. And I don't want that. So I wouldn't want it for the next person. You must keep freedom completely free. Freedom is not freedom should have no limits. If it has limits, then it's not truly freedom. You know what I mean? Unless we're talking about stuff involving children sexually, you know, I that's yeah. This was around the time. This was January the 6th, 2021, Lisa, where I said I don't like Trump. I didn't really like the January the 6th. Of course, I thought what they did was reprehensible. You know what I mean? And irresponsible and stupid, because in the end, Biden was going to be such a horrible president to begin with. You know, and his political platforms were going to be so horrible to begin with that you know people were going to turn against him anyway. And just them doing what they did put a horrible taste in the mouths of people. You know, what I mean? You know what I mean? But I didn't support banning them. You know, that's when they set up Parler, you know, their parallel version of Facebook. That's when Twitter, before Elon Musk owned it, Twitter banned Donald Trump. I wasn't supported that. I'm never in support of these things unless, like I said, where I draw the line morally, the stuff that involves sexual exploitation of children, I draw the line morally at that. I think that that's completely reprehensible. But when it comes to certain obscenities, I draw the line at certain obscenities. But when I consider to be freedom of speech, political speech is tantamount, is of utmost importance when it comes to this, because I don't think, like I said, the founding fathers had in mind obscenities when they wrote the First Amendment. Like that was the odd thing in the '90s. Like we had no more political battles to really fight in the '90s because everything was, or at least everything we thought was won by then. So we were defending the obscenity. We were defending, you know, uh, we were def- uh, we were defending the use of the N word and songs, or Tipper Gore going against first the heavy metal artist, or and then later the gangster rap artist. That we were defending obscenities, but obscenities you can go either way on it. Some people are pearl clutchers. You know what I mean? They feel like that's influencing kids or whatever, and maybe it is. You know what I mean? To a certain extent, you know, the heavy metal artists and the gangster rappers, you know, they fought their battles. But this is more important stuff. This is bigger. They figure fish to fry. This is bigger than what they were fighting. The battles they were fighting. The battles they were fighting was nothing. I mean, who really cares? At the end of the day, if uh, you know what D. Snyder from Twisted Sister, or Dr. Dre, or Tupac, you know, in his battles with C. DeLarge Tucker in the '90s. Who really gives a shit about that? That's just music. You want to listen to it, listen to it. If you don't, you don't. You know, like uh, you know, these are these are bigger bigger battles. You know, and bigger political battles with bigger social implications. But it's interesting that I bring that up when it comes to child exploitation, exploitation of children, because these same individuals that push the agenda of banning TikTok, or they're not averse. Some of them, especially in the woke left, they're not really uh, adverse to the sexual exploitation of children. Some of the more darker elements of that kind of thing, but they are against political speech. You know, they are against, you know, stating biological facts, you know, biological or historical facts that they're against, but they're not against this sort of stuff. You know, it's not even conspiracy. It's not even conspiratorial. Like, forget about conspiracy. Like, we're seeing it. You know, with a show like, remember Netflix back in 2020, Cuties. Like, remember that show and the big uh, controversy with that. You know, it's just interesting to see, like, interesting to see what some of the political commentators, like the Young Turks, what they say about it, what Ben Shapiro says about it. Candace Owens, uh, Candace, over the last few months, weeks, I kind of warming up to the things that she says because a lot of the stuff she says makes sense. I think taking political affiliations out of it, if we just apply a common sense approach, we'll agree on a lot more than we disagree. Anyway, guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button. Thank you, Jason, for contributing. Hopefully, you become a subscriber as well if you're not already. Thank you, Lisa, also for contributing. We got to defend freedom at all costs. Peace. Love you guys.